2,000 years ago, the Jerusalem temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, and this loss was incomparable as the temple was the heart of the service in Jewish worship to the Israelite God. Today, Jews and even some Christians actively work towards creating the means for building a future said to be indestructible temple. So, today let's review how Jewish and Christian denominations approach this topic. So, that a rebuilding of a physical temple needs to happen is something virtually all Orthodox Jews agree on, but the problem lies in the timing and method to arriving to this construction. Is it going to be built entirely by God and then it's going to be bestowed upon the people, as the Talmud seems to teach? Or should one actively work to rebuild it, as the Rambam teaches? Meaning, is it going to be divinely built or with the participation of man? Moreover, even the Rambam's opinions hold different interpretations. A major one being that really the central teaching is that only the Messiah can build the future temple. Furthermore, it's going to be the conclusive factor in timing for all the groups that agree on a physical rebuilding. Right now, the Temple Mount is occupied by the Dome of the Rock, which is a sacred site in Islam. So one can clearly see how the problems in this discussion are political as much as they are religiously motivated. The three daily prayers all consist of hope and pleading for the rebuilding of the physical temple. Morning, afternoon, and evening prayers all consist of this great hope for the reinstitution of the temple service and the priests in their rightly duties, as ordained in the Torah. The basis for all of this is the prophet Ezekiel, who writes in great details the visions he perceives about a future temple. So you can ask yourself, this is a common objection. Well, he did write that before the construction of the second temple, so maybe his prophecies refer to that. Well, the Orthodox are going to say, well, that can't be because the second temple's construction is very different to Ezekiel's. And the Midrashic explanation is that this was concealed to the people given their unworthiness and would only be revealed to them in a future. So basically, these outlines were of a future set to be indestructible temple. So there's so much more to say about the Orthodox perspective on this hope and longing for the rebuilding, but I do want to quickly highlight the Temple Institute and their ongoing involvement in reaching this goal of an actual building. So the Temple Institute, this Orthodox organization, has been preparing for the building of the third temple for years. And their mission, don't treat it as a joke. It's an organization that practically claims that everything is ready for the building of the third temple, except, well, for the land itself. So this is the Orthodox Jewish approach. But what about other branches of Judaism? Well, conservative Judaism differs from Orthodox Judaism in terms of theological revelation, but also of practical relevance. So, this isn't to say that conservative Judaism doesn't focus on the Torah, but rather it asks the question of how to balance traditional Jewish law and practices with the need for adaptation to modern life in a modern world. Conservative Judaism's focus seems to be presented as more inclusive and culturally adaptable, this style of Judaism. Basically put, it's a more liberal form of Judaism that adapts to a constantly changing society. In a conservative Jewish synagogue, the main difference would be the less strict observances of the Torah. Of course, remember, always in comparison to the Orthodox, seen as the most strict. And the view of women is a lot looser in light of gender equality. So while in the Orthodox view, women are restricted from many commandments, conservative Judaism has no issues with women, for example, donning the kippot and talitot, which are the skull caps and the prayer shawls. And overall, I mentioned this overview to give an idea of this branch of Judaism that distances itself from the desperate need of a physical third temple. They still recite the same daily prayers that include the temple's rebuilding, but with an emphasis on moral and communal restoration rather than a literal construction. So all of this is also to mention that in light of modern political issues, well, a physical temple's reconstruction just seems unlikely. Then there's Reform Judaism, which I'll mention as the last of the three branches. Reform Judaism is the most liberal of the branches in Judaism, placing a strong emphasis on how the individual interprets Jewish beliefs and practices. With this, it's a diverse approach that encourages personal choice and responsibility in matters of faith and observance. With its focus on current social issues, the emphasis is on contemporary values of equality and community service over ritual observance. So, in their worship and liturgy, they are the most flexible, especially in that it includes Hebrew, but really it's primarily whatever language you speak in wherever you find yourself, right? Compared to the the Orthodox synagogue service 100% Hebrew. While Reform Judaism, they include Hebrew elements, but really everybody's supposed to be included. Not everybody knows Hebrew, so it's the language of the land. Now, the music and the creative liturgical expressions are more accessible and engaging for the modern eye and ear, which is a distancing of the ritualistic approach, often labeled simply as Orthodox. Now, the liberal sense of this branch is seen especially in their approach to the Third Temple as completely metaphorical. Okay, so much so that there are Reformed prayer books that omit or reinterpret prayers for the temple's rebuilding, sort of rewriting it to focus instead on contemporary issues and universal values. So, in short words, the Orthodox await a physical rebuilding of the temple. Conservatives are more metaphorical, not emphasizing things such as, let's say, animal sacrifice. And then Reform Jews have moved past the discussion in a physical rebuilding. So, having discussed the Jewish views, now I want to turn to the Christian views. As we enter the Christian side of this discussion, we have to clarify that historically, majority of Christians and Christian beliefs, doctrines, and practices are inherently supersessionist. This is the view that the church has replaced Israel as God's chosen people. Christianity sees Jesus as that replacement or fulfillment for any need of a physical temple. And as you can see in the artwork, this is the Apostle Paul grabbing his head. He's the person technically responsible for the foundation of these beliefs. So, in the Catholic view, Jesus Christ has fulfilled any and every function of the temple. So, there's an emphasis placed on the Eucharist, for example, and that the church is the body of Christ. The foundations of these beliefs are supported by verses speaking of believers as the temple of God. For example, First Corinthians and Ephesians, Paul's writings. The church, which are the chosen believers in Jesus, are seen as the new temple. So the jump from a physical temple in which animal sacrifices are offered to a now it's a spiritual temple, being a community with spiritualized offerings. It's quite the big jump, but it's the type of rationalization expected when adapting originally Jewish beliefs and rituals into a post-temple supersessionist religion. And then we move on to the Lutherans, where despite the complete insistence of having no affiliation with the Roman Catholic Church, these views are carried on to Lutheran understanding. So much so that the only reason I separate these two into different slides is for a more respectful historical approach, but it's pretty much the same in this discussion, where here too there's a focus on the sacraments like the Eucharist and baptism as means of grace that connect believers with God's presence. The temple has no relevance to the discussion, it's been simply done away with. It's from a different time, a different era, one seen as having even been flawed and imperfect up until Jesus' fulfillment, that is. And then we have dispensationalists, which I'm grouping Baptists and Pentecostals, where this definition of dispensationalist view is definitely worth noting. I'm sure you've seen certain graphs or artistic depictions regarding these periods of time that God has set up, right? In this dispensationalist view, there is an anticipation for the rebuilding of the temple as part of the end times timeline. So, no matter the difference in chronological order, right? With topics such as a rapture or tribulation, depending on what denomination or system you're reading this graphic from. Well, it's generally agreed upon that the rebuilding of the temple will be a sign of the second coming of Christ. And in Pentecostal fashion, there's a major emphasis on current events and their prophetic significance. So ancient biblical prophecies are interpreted not within an ancient Jewish lens, for example, a lens that condemns 8th century BCE Israelite behavior and incoming destruction. Well, no. Through this lens, it's within a 20th and 21st century lens that identifies biblical themes and characters with modern day countries and people. So, with this view, we start to see a bridge built between a Jewish view of a third temple and a Christian view of Jesus' role in the discussion. So, key biblical verses for this dispensationalist view include Daniel chapter 9, Matthew 24, and one verse that we're going to highlight today that seems to imply a future physical temple. This verse is from 2 Thessalonians 2:4. The man of lawlessness opposes and exalts himself above every so called God or object of worship, so that he sits in the temple of God, proclaiming himself that he is God. So, within this view, it's not necessarily seen within its first century Jewish context, but rather a future in which this character will sit in the temple of God, implying a physical temple to sit in. Whereas other branches of Christianity would interpret it entirely metaphorical. Remember, humans are temples of God within other Christian views. Well, the dispensationalist view sees the physical temple as necessary to fulfill this, within this view, this prophecy. Now, make this distinction very clear. The Orthodox Jew anticipates the reinstatement of the sacrificial system and the temple service as the ultimate means of receiving the divine presence. That's their understanding of the temple. Meanwhile, the Pentecostal view shares this supersessionist beliefs of Jesus replacing the temple. So their focus is not like the Orthodoxes, but rather it's just on the temple's prophetic significance, which would herald the return of Jesus. So the religious or ritualistic significance the temple holds for Orthodox Jews is not entirely present in the Pentecostal view. Again, Jews await an actual rebuilding of the temple to serve in it, to actively engage in it, whereas the dispensationalist view says, well, the temple is more just to bring Jesus back, but what significance does the temple have? It's fulfilled in Jesus again. So while we've reviewed the Jewish view and the Christian view, which appear to be on two opposite spectrums, I'd just like to finish off with Messianic Jews, who are, long story short, Jews that believe in Jesus, where they find themselves being pushed away by both the Jew and the Christian. And the subject itself is one where it maybe even be divisive among the movement, because I've seen a lot of Christians, we'll say Messianic Gentiles, right? Non-Jews that learn about Messianic Judaism, they come in with these presuppositions, and ultimately they have to ask yourself, right? Because if there's so many talks about a third temple, well, where does Jesus fit in all this? So many within the Messianic faith undergo a process of reevaluation of their Christian understanding, which includes questioning and revising supersessionist doctrines. The supersessionist view maintains a complete cessation and abolition of the temple service in place for Jesus. So Messianic Jews um, ask, is it possible to reread the Hebrew Bible and Gospels to understand what the actual role of the temple is and what the actual point of Jesus' sacrifices? So I'm just going to recommend, if you're interested in that Messianic approach, there's this book called What About the Sacrifices by D. Thomas Lancaster. It's pretty short. It's a good read if you really care about the question. So yeah, that's the Messianic Jewish approach. Ultimately, we end where we started. The Orthodox say there will 100% be a temple. Conservatives say, well, I mean, if there is, there is, and if there isn't, there isn't. Reforms, Jews say, guys, come on, like let's shift our focus. Then there's the Catholics that say absolutely not. Jesus is the fulfillment. Lutherans that say the exact same thing. Dispensationalists come in to say there will be a third temple, but just to bring back Jesus, because aside from that, the building is kind of, it was fulfilled in Jesus. And then Messianic Jews come in with their original argument that the temple and Jesus both have their own functions, that they don't need to contradict one another. So no matter what background you come from, if it's Jewish or Christian, no matter your background or belief system you're subscribed to, most within these circles agree with this principle I want to end with, written by Maimonides. Anim Amin. This means I believe. The full creed is I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah. And although he may tarry, although he may delay, although he's taking quite some time, even so, I will wait for him every day until he comes. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next lesson.